Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. My name's Lauren Knight-Pearson. I am a clinical social worker. I currently work at the Barry Family Health Center, which is about 25 miles here from Worcester. It's part of the UMass Memorial Health in general. It's a family medicine residency clinic, so we have faculty attending providers as well as 12 residents. I've been out there for 10 years now, but prior to that, I worked in the emergency department at UMass Memorial on the university campus. So I've had quite a bunch of different experiences in my career. But today we're going to talk a lot about our mental health, how we stay connected, because it's harder to stay connected as we age. So we'll talk about that, and we'll talk a little bit about grief, because grief is very prevalent for us, because as we age, we start to lose friends and family, but we also grieve our changes in our functional status and our abilities. So kind of an overview of things we're going to talk about. If anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hands and we'll answer questions. I have time slated at the end for question and answers, but if something comes up in the middle of what I'm presenting, feel free to raise your hand. I don't mind. Interaction is a good thing. So let's get started. Try to coordinate myself and not turn the microphone off. All right, so we're going to talk about ways to prevent social isolation, loneliness. What I hope for you to take away at the end of this presentation is being able to identify the difference between what social isolation is and what loneliness is. Kind of describe ways to stay active, ways to stay connected with friends, families, and others, and understand grief and grieving in a healthy way. All right, so let's start. Loneliness. So loneliness is actually a feeling, and we'll see how it's different from social isolation, but it's a state of distress. It's a state of discomfort when you're feeling that your desire for social connection and the actual experience of your social connection does not align with each other. We can feel lonely. Like, you can be in this room with all these people surrounding you and still feel lonely because you don't feel like you have that connection to another person. So people will often say, I have all these friends, I have all these family, but I'm still lonely, because they're not feeling that there's a connection, that they're not making that connection with friends, families, or loved ones. When we're lonely, because it is a feeling, we're going to feel pain, and it's got that emotional pain. And what happens is, when we feel emotional pain, we feel vulnerable. So we feel lonely and we feel like we're lacking social connection, but we feel vulnerable because we're feeling down, and where then we can become fearful or distrustful of others and not have the social connection or the interaction with others. So it's kind of a cycle, right? And you have to think about, how do I break that cycle? How do I get out of that cycle? How do I recognize that I'm lonely, and what do I need to feel that I can be connected in a way that I feel safe, right? Because it's all about your emotional safety. And we know that when we have certain emotions, we feel vulnerable. And we don't like feeling vulnerable because we feel that people can take advantage of us or they can hurt us. So we protect ourselves, and a wall goes up, right? So it becomes, again, that circle and that cycle of, I feel this way, but I don't want to engage with other people or reach out because I'm fearful. So that's a hard place to be. And I think in the last few years, with COVID, we've had the social isolation, but we've also had worsening loneliness, because the way to stay connected has been so different, and something that we've never experienced before. So social isolation, we know that loneliness is a sense of feeling. It's a feeling that we have. But social isolation is really the lack of social contacts. So you can be socially isolated but not lonely. You can be lonely and socially isolated. Social isolation is really being cut off from what your normal practice of interaction with others is. We learned that very well, unfortunately, with COVID, right? We thought, oh, 2 weeks will be great. 2 weeks, we can all kind of take a break from each other and chill out a little bit. And 2 weeks turned into a month, which turned into a year, which turned into 2 years. And obviously still going, but obviously we can now congregate and interact better. And really at the beginning of COVID, we didn't know, like, how do we stay connected? How do I stay socially connected with my friends, my families, and people that I know in a safe way, right? And especially as we grow older and in the aging population, we had to be really careful that we didn't spread anything, any virus to others, because we were still so unsure of the virus itself. So it made it really, really hard. So with the social isolation, it can lead to loneliness. So think about ways like, how do I feel if I'm socially isolated? What are those feelings that I have? If I'm socially isolated and I can't get out of my house, what are the ways to stay connected? How do I interact with others? How do I have that connection with other people? Thinking about those types of things. So when we either live alone or live in an area where we're more isolated, we're all at risk for social isolation. However, living alone is one of the biggest things that puts us at risk for that social isolation, which can lead to loneliness. So if you live alone, or if you're unable to leave your home, for individuals who cannot leave their home, for transportation issues, disability issues, that's going to increase your risk. Major life changes, individuals who experience an illness, a death of their partner, retirement. Retirement's a huge, huge change in your life. People will often say, I can't wait to retire, I can't wait to retire. And usually what I hear from individuals is generally the first 3 to 6 months, they enjoy to the fullest. And then after that, they start to recognize, like, I don't have a routine, I don't have a schedule. What am I doing? What are my hobbies? How do I engage in those hobbies in a way that's going to be important and I'm going to get benefit from that? Financial stress, right? That changes as we age. So that can increase loneliness and social isolation. If you are wanting to go out and engage in different activities, but the financially you're not able to, right? That's going to worsen your social isolation as well. If you're acting as a caregiver, how many people have either acted or are acting as a caregiver currently? Okay. So a good number of people, right? Like, that in itself is challenging because you're most often have a dual role. So you're a caregiver, but you could be someone's partner. You could be an adult child. You could be taking care of your own children. So that itself makes interacting with other people really difficult. And you're really, if you think about interacting with the people you're taking care of. So let's say you're taking care of your adult parent or parents. Those are the people that you're interacting with probably most often, depending on the type of care they need. You're interacting with their system, and you're decreased your own interaction with your other system. So it's really important that if you are in a caregiver role, that you find the time, or that you really take the time for yourself, to have some time for yourself. It doesn't have to be large quantities of time, but allow yourself time away from the person or the people that you're providing care for to engage with your colleagues, your support network, your peers. That's really, really important. It's tough to be a caregiver, and it's not uncommon for caregivers at times to feel resentful. And it's not purposefully that we feel resentful when we have to take care of someone. It's a natural, normal feeling. It will often you'll feel selfish if you're being like, oh my goodness, I'm taking care of my mom or my dad, and this is just really overwhelming, and I'm really angry or resentful that I'm having to do this. That's very normal. So the more that you can take some time away and interact with your own peers, that feeling of resentment or that feeling may subside a little bit. So really, really important if you are a caregiver. Other thing is cognitive changes, right? Unfortunately, as we age, our cognition changes. We have memory challenges, right? We don't remember as well as we used to. I will admit that firsthand. I have sticky notes are my best friend because there's a lot going on in the brain, so I have to write it down so I remember. But with memory change can also come symptoms of depression or anxiety, which are likely going to make us withdraw and potentially socially isolate because we're embarrassed. Sometimes people will be like, oh, I don't remember, I don't want to go out in public, I can't, what if I don't remember the person's name? So it can make us feel anxious, so then we stay away, and then in turn we can potentially become lonely. One of the challenges with memory is hearing difficulty. So what we know is individuals that are hard of hearing often will complain and say, oh, I have memory issues. And it's not necessarily the memory, it's the hearing. So we always think first, if someone's having cognitive issues and they're not interacting as well with others, or they can't socially interact, we always want to think about the hearing because they're missing things. They're missing pieces of the conversation. They will choose to not engage with others because they don't always hear or know and are able to keep up with conversations because of the hearing. So that can make people feel isolated as well. Language barriers, right? Language. It's tough language-wise if someone does not speak the language, or they're not fluent in a certain language. So that's hard. If you live in a community that, let's say, is all English speaking and you speak, I don't know, a different language. Because there's so many languages, right? Where, especially in Worcester. Like, I come from the rural country out in Barrie, and like everyone speaks English, and we get an occasional patient who will speak a different language, but it's rare. So in a bigger city, there's a lot of different languages. But if you're not speaking the main language, it makes it harder to interact with other people. So living in a rural community, right? It's harder to interact with people. So I live out in Oakham. My closest neighbor is probably 4 miles from my house, right? We don't have streetlights, we don't have sidewalks. So we're not out interacting, it's not a big neighborhood, right? So if you're in a rural neighborhood, you're much more likely, if you're older, to be more isolated. Or if you live in an unsafe neighborhood, right? Like, not everyone lives in the neighborhood that can be safe, or it becomes unsafe for whatever reason. So you may be going out of your house or out of your apartment or wherever you're living less frequently because you don't feel safe. you're experiencing discrimination, whether it be because of your age, because of your ethnicity, your culture, your race, sexual orientation, gender, your gender identity. So we have to be mindful of all those things. I think we're slowly starting to improve as a society as a whole regarding discriminatory practices, but we're definitely not where we need to be. So we have to be mindful that if someone feels discriminated against, they're not going to go and be as open to interacting with others because they feel vulnerable and they feel like they could be hurt. So along with the risks, kind of the social risks, there's health risks as well. And we have quite a bit of information that supports those who feel lonesome or those who feel socially isolated tend to have more frequent trips to the emergency department because they feel that they have some type of medical issue going on, or they often have symptoms of anxiety. So when I had worked in the emergency department, it was very common to see people come in and feel like they were having a heart attack because they were having chest pressure, racing heart. And when we'd meet with them and talk with them, we would hear about how it was probably more anxious feelings, but the symptoms mimicked heart issues. So it was something that, excuse me, I'd always work up medically, but most often it was because people were feeling anxious. And in some cases, it was like, hey, I can come to the emergency department, I can socialize, there's all these people coming around me, but not the best way to socialize, right? Although, it's sometimes better than TV. We see people who are socially isolated and lonely with higher rates of hypertension, again, likely due to feeling anxious or feeling depressed. Heart disease, if people are not getting out, sometimes they're not exercising, not moving around, not eating properly, decreased immune function. Obviously, depression and anxiety, those are huge symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety. It doesn't mean that you have clinical depression or generalized anxiety, but you can often have the symptoms of feeling sad and feeling down, right? Because I can't get out or I don't want to go out. In turn, that leads to feeling I'm worried all the time. And because I worry all the time, now I don't want to go out. So it's kind of a vicious circle that it becomes. And with that becomes the cognitive decline. If you're not interacting with other people, you're not using your brain, right? So you have to think about, how do I use my brain? How do I engage my brain in that cognitive function on a regular basis to keep myself alert? Poor sleep. This happens because if we're socially isolated, and we're staying in our homes, we may nap during the day. Our sleep cycle becomes disrupted. So there's not that I'm awake during the day and I sleep during the night. And unfortunately, as we age, our sleep cycle naturally changes. If we don't sleep well, we don't function well. If we don't sleep well, we don't feel well, right? All of us have probably had a night or nights where we don't sleep well. You get up the next day, you're like, okay, I can get through the day, and usually we can get back into a normal sleep pattern. However, if you go night after night after night without proper sleep, that's just going to affect your mood, that's going to affect your health. It's like the ripple effect with poor sleep. And so it's really important that you can be as active as possible, because that can be one of the ways to help improve your sleep. And that can be, taking a walk or, even walking around your home, up and down your driveway, right? I have a large panel of patients that I see who are elderly, and I really dislike that term, but are, let's say over the age of 65 or 60. And we talk about ways to stay active and how to get creative with that, how to get creative in staying active. So really kind of thinking outside the box to help stay active and potentially improve your sleep. And we have to remember about pain, right? Pain is a huge thing. And if we're feeling emotional pain, it actually activates many of the same stress responses in our bodies that physical pain activates. And when we have that emotional pain and the stress response that tends to go on for a long period of time, we're going to have other types of challenges. So we're going to have issues within our body. We're going to have inflammation in our body, which is going to cause a reduced ability to fight off disease. So again, it kind of becomes that vicious circle. So really important to be mindful that there are a lot, obviously, of health risks that can happen because of social isolation and loneliness. So we think about ways, like, how do we stay connected? How do we stay connected? I often think, and I say to a lot of the people I work with, we have to have a foundation, right? We have to have a solid foundation, and that solid foundation is going to include proper sleep, proper nutrition, and proper hydration, right? Because if that foundation isn't solid, as you build on that, it's going to fall down. So I describe it to people as like a house, right? If you have a house or your apartment or whatever type of living structure you have, if your foundation is not solid, all the floors that you build on top of that are not going to be supported. So as individuals, we have to have a very solid foundation to start with. And that, again, proper sleep, proper nutrition, proper hydration. And then from there we can build. So thinking about how do we engage? What are activities that you may have in the past enjoyed or currently enjoyed, and how do you still engage in those activities? How do you engage in those activities if you have abilities that you've lost over time, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in the grief piece of that loss of being able to enjoy certain things. So re-engaging in activities that you may have enjoyed in the past or that you're currently enjoying, thinking about what are those things that I've always wanted to do that I never did, right? I don't know. You know, like maybe I want to take yoga, or maybe like I want to, I think of an individual who, after retirement, he always wanted to carve. He always wanted to carve things like out of wood. And so he started carving. And now he carves these absolutely magnificent birds and decoys. It was something he wanted to do, never had really a chance to do it. He retired and has some unbelievably beautiful works. Taking a class, right? Take a class. What do you want to learn? I know a lot of the schools in Worcester have classes available. I guess one good thing that came out of COVID is we have better technology and can engage with people outside of the face-to-face, even though that human connection is so important, but we can access a lot more through the internet and online. We have to be deliberate. We have to schedule time to connect with people. How often do we say, oh, I'll get to that later, I'll do that later, I'll do that later. Later comes and we never do it. So we have to be deliberate. We have to say, I'm going to call up Mary and make a date to either have coffee or pop over and have lunch, or say to her, hey, listen, we haven't connected in a while, let's make a time to connect. We have to be deliberate about that. Because if we're not deliberate, it doesn't get done, right? How many of it, I think to myself, oh, I have a day off. I have all these things I want to do, and I'm like, oh, I can do it later. I can do it later. Later comes, and I'm like, yep, I never did any of those things I wanted to do because I thought I had the time. So we have to be deliberate. And scheduling, it's important for us to have a schedule, right? We don't want to have a schedule that's so rigid that every moment of our day is structured and defined. But having a schedule helps kind of keep us focused and keeps us on track. So, I don't want people to go and be like, I have to get up at 8 o'clock, and at 8:15 I have to eat breakfast, and at 8:30 I have to do this. But kind of a schedule of, all right, I get up around this time, and today I'm going to go to the gym, or today I'm going to come to the senior center in Worcester, and then I want to get this done. And so having that schedule helps us structure our day and actually makes us feel more accomplished and feel like, okay, I got those things done. And in turn, that's going to motivate us and it's going to make us feel better. And thinking about staying connected in a way of the face-to-face piece is great, right? That's so important. But also staying connected through televideo, telephone, however you can be creative to stay connected, right? Obviously, face-to-face, I think that's the best. Recognizing that's not always possible. So thinking of other ways to be connected to people. And that's friends, that's family, that's colleagues, whoever is your support group is staying connected with them. Thinking about joining activities, libraries, obviously senior centers, community centers, what are activities, volunteering, right? Obviously COVID changed a lot for volunteering. Now I know there's more opportunities if people are able. It's another way to stay connected. It's another way to interact with people. So what are those activities that you enjoy? What are those activities, again, you've wanted to try, but you haven't done it, and now you have the time and you can try it. Going back to taking a class, but you can take an online class. And staying physically active. How do we stay physically active? What are the ways to stay physically active? On your handout, one of the resources we often provide is something called Silver Sneakers. So several gyms have opportunities to join, believe mostly at a reduced rate. I think it depends on the organization. But they have activities that are geared towards individuals and who are generally over 60, and they focus on, obviously we're not going to get you up on some machine and get you running on the treadmill, but we're going to focus on how can we safely keep you active, right? Because the more active we are, the healthier our bodies are going to be. The more active we are, the less chance we have of falling. Our balance is better. Our emotional health is better. I mean, how many people go out and take a walk and they're like, oh, I feel good, right? I feel better. I got those great endorphins flowing. So it doesn't have to be, a huge amount of physical activity. I'm certainly not asking anyone to run a marathon, but daily movement is so important. And there's so many great things now. I actually have an individual who I'll do some chair yoga with as part of treatment for them. I mean, she's 90 years old and, balance is an issue, but we can do some things that not only help her body and actually help reduce some of her pain, but also engages her mind and helps her feel emotionally better. So there's lots of things to think about. And again, we have to think about, how do we do that? How do I stay physically active? Again, I talk about where I work in a very somewhat rural area. We don't have a lot out there. So I'll talk to patients about, I don't care if you walk up and down your driveway once. That's something, right? Walk around your house if your grass is level. Something is better than nothing. Engaging in spiritual activities, that can be huge for people. If people feel connected to a religious community, that is really, really important. You have connections, people who have similar interests. That's a huge place. A lot of people will say that they feel very connected, that they feel emotionally better, having that spiritual connection. And that can be anything. It doesn't have to be an organized religion. It can, whatever an individual considers their spiritual, that sense, that's fine. So that can be a huge connection for people. And with COVID, I laugh because pen pals became really a thing for a lot of people during COVID. Right? Like, have a pen pal. In our age of technology, right, and texting or emailing and all those great things, those are great. But when was the last time anyone sat down and wrote a letter to someone, right? Like, when did you last do that? So I have several friends from college and grad school who, they're all over the country now. And with our work in COVID for behavioral health, we transitioned right away to telehealth and talking to our patients on the phone. And I sat in an office all day, every day, as did my other colleagues, and we literally dialed the phone, talked to a patient for 30 or 60 minutes, hung up the phone, talked to the next person. At the end of the day, the last thing I wanted to do was talk to anyone. I'd go home and I'd just be like, please, no one talk to me. And so during that time, I was like, I feel really bad. I haven't reached out to these people that I have connection with. And I actually sat down one night and wrote a letter. And I was like, wow, this is old school. But it felt like it was so nice. It was like, let's just go back. Let's put away the screen. Let's put away the phone. And let's just write a letter. And one of my probably best friends from college, that's how we communicate now. Like, we don't text. We don't video chat or all the other things that they have on social media. We actually write letters. And it's so refreshing to get a letter in my mailbox. It's not a bill. So think about that. Who are people that you can have, who can you be a pen pal with? Right? It doesn't take long. You don't need any fancy paper. I actually wrote her a letter one day on all the pieces of little papers from all the different organizations that send like the address labels and the little tab of paper, because that's what I had. I'm like, okay, here you go. Here's your like very long letter on little pieces of paper. So thinking about who you can connect with as a pen pal. A lot of the schools have them. Sometimes libraries will have like people that you can connect with. So thinking about that. And on one of your handouts, there's some different, specifically websites. It was really hard to actually find information, like written information on how to stay connected. Everything was like, go to this website. So different websites, AARP, some other websites regarding aging, and they have all different things of how to stay connected. So thinking about staying connected, I want to transition into talking about grief, right? So I really, healgrief.org is a very amazing organization. It's an online, they have quite a few resources, and I really liked, when I was researching more about grief, that for people, so the quote is, grief for those of us who understand, no explanation is needed. For those of us who do not, no description is possible. I think everyone knows what it's like to experience grief, right? We all know what grief is. However, we don't understand the extent of grief based on the relationship that we had with a person. So someone loses their spouse. That's very different than losing an aunt, an uncle, or a cousin. You lose their parents, your mother, your father, whoever you identified as your parents. That's very different. God forbid you lose a child. That's a very small cohort of people. I cannot say that I understand what it's like to lose a child. I've not lost a child. So we have to be mindful of the relationship that the individual has with the person that they're grieving. So I think that kind of, right, like that's perfect, because for those who understand it. For those who don't, how do you put that into words or explain the feeling? So kind of what is grief, right? What is it? So according to kind of Oxford and Merriam-Webster, it's sorrow, deep sorrow, likely caused from someone's death. But I think it's a lot more than that. Yes, grief happens because we lose a person, but we also grieve loss of other things, right? We grieve the loss of our functional ability as we age, right? We grieve the fact that, when I was 40, I used to be able to do this. I'm 50 or I'm 60 or I'm 70. I can still do it. It just takes me a lot longer, and we get very frustrated with that. So we grieve that loss of our abilities in some ways, sometimes functional ability, right? Because we have an illness or something changes in our life and we lose function of our arms, our legs, whatever it may be. We grieve that loss, right? For all those years we've known what it's like to have two functioning arms, and now all of a sudden we have one and we can't do the same things, or we have to rethink how we do things. So for the Dictionary of Psychology, for the APA, it talks about kind of the anguish after a significant loss. And again, usually person. And in researching grief, it was all like person related. So there's psychological distress, there's anxiety, there's confusion, there's sometimes obsession and dwelling in what people will often be like, I can't get out of that grief. The deeper that we're in grief, it's going to affect us physically. It's going to affect, similar to the social isolation and the loneliness, it's going to affect us physically, emotionally. It's, as we have that emotional pain, it's going to affect our body's immune system. We're likely maybe not going to take as good care of ourselves as we normally would. Often we'll hear people say, I just want to die. I just want to go be with whoever the person was. Because it's really hard to picture life without that person or that thing that they're grieving. We often hear people say that they have regret. If only I had, if the coulda, shoulda, woulda is what I say, like, right? Like, if I could have done this, I should have done this. If I had done that, this individual or this thing would still be with me. So it's so multifaceted. It's not just, I'm sad because I lost a loved one. Again, it becomes the ripple effect. So what are the things we grieve? Obviously, family, however we identify family, friends, pets, right? Like, I think I'm an animal person. And yes, it's very sad when we lose friends and families. I think losing a pet is, I don't know. I don't know if I'll say it's as bad as losing a person, but I think losing a pet is a different grief, because pets, I mean, it's the unconditional love, right? Pets provide us the unconditional love. So my husband and I lost our yellow lab a year ago, and we knew it was coming, right? You prepare for it and all that stuff. And someone actually said to me, well, it's just a dog. And I was like, okay, let's talk about grief, and it's not just a dog. So we have to be mindful that it's family, it's friends, it's pets, our connections, right? Our social connections. If we lose our social connections, we grieve that. Our physical abilities, right? As we lose ability to do certain things. Right? Like, we don't bounce back. As we get older, we don't bounce back as easily as we did when we were younger. Our health decline for not only ourselves, but our loved ones, right? Again, let's go back to thinking about those of you who are caretakers. So you're caretaking individuals who have declining physical health, emotional health. So you're grieving that loss, but you're also grieving some of the losses that you're experiencing as you take care of those loved ones. And then a terminal illness, right? Like, you have someone's diagnosed with cancer and it's inoperable and incurable. People often say, oh, I don't know, is it worse to know, or is it worse to have something just suddenly happen? And I don't think it's worse either way. There's no good way. So we don't just grieve the loss of friends or family. We grieve the loss of other things in our lives as well. One of the big things is as far as functional status, is ability to drive and have independence. I hear that from so many people. I can't drive, or I'm not safe to drive, and how that impacts going back to the social isolation. And because public transportation is not always the best depending on where you live, so it makes it harder to get out. So we grieve that loss of independence. So we have to understand grief. Grief is very subjective. Grief is very personal. Grief is very unique. No two people are going to grieve the same way. We have to not judge people who are grieving, right? How many times do we hear, you just need to get over it. It's been 3 months, it's been 6 months, it's been a year. I always say to people, once you experience grief, your grief is going to stay with you. It does not go away. Grief doesn't end. What happens is you learn to navigate life with that grief, right? Grief, it's gonna stay there, right? It's not gonna all of a sudden you're gonna get up one day and be like, wow, I have no more grief. It's going to be there. What I try to help people understand is it's not always gonna be on that surface all the time. Sometimes it's gonna go down below the surface a little bit, and you may go on and be like, this is great, everything's going well, I feel good, and then there's gonna be a trigger, and it's gonna bring that grief right up to the surface again. And we have to be mindful when that happens. And it's okay, right? It is okay. It's a feeling, it's an emotion. Again, people who don't understand it don't understand how it's going to ebb and flow. And it doesn't come out, it's not like you can feel like, okay, I'm doing great and now I'm going to go home and I'm feeling sad so I can grieve. That grief is going to come up at the time that you don't want it to come up. You don't want to have to explain it to people. It's just going to be there and you're going to be like, great. So we learn to navigate it. We learn to navigate through that and how to live with it and how to just take it as part of our daily life. And the feelings are so normal, right? Feelings of sadness, like that's normal. I have people say, you know what, I loved my partner, but I'm really relieved. I'm relieved that they're not suffering anymore, and I'm relieved that the burden that I had of taking care of them is over. And that's okay, right? People will hear that from someone and think, how horrible, but those are true feelings and that is okay. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't have taken care of him. You probably would have done the exact same thing, but you're like, oh, I can take a step back. And that's okay. Those are feelings, right? And no one can tell you how you should or should not feel, but we do, right? We do. There's no timetable for grief, right? No 6 months, no year, no 2 years, no 5 years, no 10 years. There's no timetable for it. It does not go away. It gets easier to navigate sometimes, and sometimes it's really hard to navigate. So it's part of understanding it and just kind of embracing it, right? It's one of those things that we have to accept. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept it. And by accepting it, we think, how do I embrace it and work through it when it happens? It is definitely not linear, right? You're not gonna go and you're gonna grieve and then you're gonna be happy and you're gonna be happy forever. No, it's all over the place. It's like you see those straight lines, like this is my life. Like this is what I want my life to look like, and then you see that the little meme or something, and it's all squiggly lines. That's grief, because grief is not linear. And again, it doesn't go away. We don't get over it. We learn to navigate it. It becomes part of our life. We welcome it. I always say to people, embrace it. Welcome it into your life, because the harder you fight it, the worse it's going to be. We'll survive it. We do survive it. It does lessen over time. It goes from the surface and it goes down a little bit and it comes up and it goes down. So it's up and down, but we will survive it. Grief has not killed anyone, but we will survive it. Sometimes we want to die. Like I have a lot of people telling me like, I just want to die. I cannot see my life without whatever person or thing in it. I can't picture my life with that person not there. But we survive grief. So that they talk about the great 5 stages of grief. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was a Swiss-American psychiatrist who described the 5 stages of grief. But there's also this kind of new thought for elders is there 9 stages of grief. So we know the typical 5 stages of denial, like this isn't happening. I can't, no, this is a joke. It's like someone pinched me, I'm dreaming. Anger, right? We have the anger, like, why did this happen? Who do I blame, right? Who do I point the finger at? The bargaining, if I had done whatever, this would not have happened. The depression, right? I'm sad. I can't handle this. This is overwhelming for me. And then that place where we get to of acceptance. And I always caution people, we hear the word acceptance and we think, well, if I accept it, I have to like it. We don't. You don't have to like it, but there are things we have to accept. I have to accept that we live in New England and that summer is coming. I do not like summer. I do not like the hot weather. The sun and I are not friends. But I have to accept it, right? I can only change it if I choose to do something about it. But I choose to stay here, so I have to accept it. So again, we have to accept our grief. We don't have to like it, but we have to accept that it's happening. So we have those 5 stages. But then there's this thought of the 9 stages of grief for the older adults. And we'll go through kind of each one of them. But the shock, denial, disorganization, anger, guilt and bargaining, physical and emotional distress, depression, loss and loneliness, withdrawal, and acceptance. So you can see there's obviously a few more added in there. So shock and denial. That's generally what you're going to see and experience immediately following whatever the event was. People will describe, like, I feel numb, I don't have feeling. You may often see people who are not expressing emotion. Like, they may not cry, they may not have emotion, they may just kind of have that blank look on their face. They may be in disbelief, right? That's part of the shock, that's part of the denial. They may have a distorted piece of reality as far as, this isn't real, this isn't happening, I'm not based in reality. It's generally a short period of time that happens. That's part of the brain's response. So what can you do if you're helping someone cope through grief? And they're kind of in that shock and denial phase. And you'll see as we kind of talk about what are the things that you can do, they're all pretty similar. You're going to offer them space, but you're going to be there for them, right? So I will always say to patients and the faculty I work with and the residents I teach, some of the most powerful things you can do with someone who's experiencing grief is just be present. You don't have to say anything. The thing that you can do is just be present. I don't want you telling them like, this will end. Just be present. Just sit and be present. And it's tough. Like, none of us like to sit in that awkward silence with someone who's grieving. We want to fix it. We want to make it better for them. But just being present for them. And you want to validate the way the person's feeling, right? It doesn't matter if you feel the same way or you think they should be feeling different. You're going to validate how they're feeling. I'm sorry you're feeling this way. This is really difficult. I can see this is really difficult for you. So validation, because at this point and at any point through grief, no one wants to hear, it's going to get better, it will end, you'll feel better soon, because that's not the way you're feeling in the moment. So disorganization, this can happen as the reality of what's taken place is now setting in. We may see, I kind of like the checking out, right? Someone may just check out. They may just they're there, but they're not there. Like, their person is there, but their mind is somewhere else. Or what can happen is they may become really hyper-focused on the loss that they just had. So they may check out for a little while, or they may become very hyper-vigilant on their loss. Again, what do you do? How do you help someone in this stage? So you really help them find their supports, their friends, their family, whatever the support network is, the church community. And again, validate the feelings, right? Here's going to be the common theme. Validate the person's feelings. You don't want to offer advice. You're just going to validate their feelings. Anger, right? So then there's the anger. Feelings of hopelessness and resentment. You're not going to see people generally have like an emotional outburst. You're going to see more agitation, frustration than anything else. And they're going to often project the anger for those people who are around them in their immediate group. Again, validate the feelings, provide the space, be patient, acknowledge how they're feeling. Recognize that it may not be rational, but that's the way the person's feeling. And the other challenge is we go through these stages, they don't come like stage 1, stage 2, they kind of all come all over the place. So the guilt and the bargaining, we go to kind of like, if I had done, how can, if I had done this, then, if this event wouldn't have happened. We see people blaming themselves. They bargain oftentimes for people who are spiritually connected. They will bargain with their God or whatever their spiritual connection is. We want to encourage people to talk about the feelings. And again, validate them. Validate if they need to talk to someone, if they need to speak with a grief counselor. Often people just being able to talk about it and not being judged can be super helpful for this, for all these stages. So the physical and emotional distress, people may feel hopeless, they may feel helpless, they may have trouble moving on with their life or feeling like nobody cares. They're going to experience symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety. They're going to feel like they have no energy, maybe a lack of appetite, maybe not sleeping well. This generally passes, but again, you want to encourage them to keep that good foundation, good nutrition, good hydration. And again, validate the feelings, right? Here's the theme, validate their feelings. You can't fix it, just validate how they're feeling. So depressive symptoms are very normal for an individual who's grieving. And what we need to be mindful of is just that depressive despair. And if the prolonged grief can lead to more significant depression. So again, we want to validate feelings. We want to support the person's emotional health. We want to ask them to speak to someone, whether it be their doctor or get them in counseling or therapy, something to that extent. Loss and loneliness, right? So it comes back to the social interaction. Generally, on average, 2 to 4 weeks after a loss is when the reality truly sets in for most individuals. They recognize their routine has changed, and they look for ways to fill the void. So it's important that often we see someone loses something or something, and there's all this support initially, and that's great. We want to make sure there's support longer term, right? Because 2 to 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, everyone's kind of back to their normal routine, and the person who has had the loss is still trying to figure out what their new way of life is going to be. So you want to ensure that you have that connection with them. Again, making sure that they have support networks, validating feelings, making sure we don't feel well. Sometimes we self-medicate, alcohol, other substances. We want to make sure people aren't trying to feel better by using substance. So we also have to be careful and watch for withdrawal, right? Often people will say, I'm sick and tired of talking about it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. So you want to validate their feelings, but also be respectful if they just don't want to talk about their loss. Right? Who wants to kind of rehash it over and over and over again? So people may avoid social interaction because of that. So again, you want to encourage social interaction, but you don't want to push it. Again, the validation of the feelings and really being the constant, right? You want to be a constant for someone. You don't really want to give up on them. Because this is about the time where everyone's back to their normal life and their normal routine, and they are feeling more alone. And then acceptance, right? This is the stage where it replaces that hopelessness. They start to engage and feel more comfortable in new hobbies, and they recognize life can go on. So again, we want to encourage new interests and acknowledge that the experience they've had has changed them, but it's okay, and help them kind of move forward with their new normal. So just a few tips. You want to resist the urge to fix. I will laugh because I went to school, my colleagues went to school, and we were taught how to help, how to fix, and then we get out into practice and they're like, don't fix. So you want to resist that urge to fix things for people who are grieving. You want to be present. You want to validate their feelings. So some things to not say is it will be okay after a while. You'll be fine after a while, right? I understand how you feel. Unless you understand how they feel, don't tell them you understand how you feel. Don't tell them they shouldn't feel a certain way. Don't tell them they have to be strong. No, you don't have to be strong. But you want to say, I wish I knew the right words, right? I wish I knew what the right word was to say. I don't know, but know that I care about you, know that I'm here for you. I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about your loved ones. You're in my thoughts, you're in my prayers. And then continue connecting with these people on an ongoing basis. I think it's time for lunch. So if anyone has questions, I'll hang around for a little bit. But thank you very much. I appreciate your time.